What foundational ideas are shaping the education our kids receive, day to day in schools? And how much does federal policy actually influence what goes on in, say, your local classroom? These aren't just like abstract thoughts. They're really at the core of a recent federal action, one that directly impacts families, communities, really all across the country. Today, we're doing a deep dive into Executive Order 14190. It's titled Ending Radical Indoctrination in K-12 Schooling. It was signed by President Trump back on January 29, 2025, and it showed up in the Federal Register on February 3rd. It's about 5 pages long, and our mission really is to cut through the official language, to unpack it for you. We want to understand its stated purpose, figure out what its key terms actually mean, and explore what actions it tells federal agencies in K-12 schools to take. Think of this as your shortcut to understanding a potentially pretty complex piece of policy, one that could really affect your child's school experience. Okay, so let's unpack this. The executive order, it starts by laying out its core concerns, right? What's the central problem it claims it's trying to fix?
Right. The stated purpose really centers on this idea of parental trust, trust in schools. It says parents expect schools to provide a rigorous education and instill a sense of patriotism, admiration for the nation. But the order claims in recent years, parents have seen schools, quote, indoctrinating children, using what it calls radical anti-American ideologies, and also deliberately, quote, blocking parental oversight. That's the core assertion.
Okay. Indoctrination and blocking oversight.
Exactly. And the EO goes on to say this creates an echo chamber, that's the term it uses, where students are, quote, forced to accept these ideologies without question or critical examination. It gives specific examples like children being compelled to adopt identities as either victims or oppressors solely based on their skin color and other characteristics they can't change. It also talks about young men and women being made to question whether they were born in the wrong body or even whether to view their parents and their reality as enemies to be blamed.
Wow, so it paints a pretty stark picture of these practices. What kind of impact does the order say these things have? On students? On families?
Precisely. It states these practices not only erode critical thinking, but also sow division, confusion, and distrust.
Wow.
And that ultimately this undermines, quote, the very foundations of personal identity and family unity.
So it's not just about, curriculum disagreement.
No, according to the order, it goes deeper. It's about identity, family, fundamental trust. And it further claims that imprinting anti-American, subversive, harmful, and false ideologies on kids actually violates existing anti-discrimination laws, civil rights laws, and it usurps basic parental authority.
It gives examples of that.
It does. For instance, steering students towards surgical and chemical mutilation without parental consent or involvement, or allowing males access to private spaces designated for females. It suggests these could potentially go against federal laws like FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, and PPRA, the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, and also Title IX. The document also argues something else, that demanding acquiescence to white privilege or unconscious bias actually ends up promoting racial discrimination and undermining national unity.
Okay, so those are some really strong claims. Given all that, what's the administration's stated policy response in this order? How do they plan to address these concerns?
Well, the order is pretty direct on policy. It states the administration will enforce the law to make sure that anyone receiving federal funds for K-12 education follows all the applicable laws, specifically those prohibiting discrimination and protecting parental rights.
Right.
And it explicitly names Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, Title IX, FERPA, and PPRA again.
So it's tying compliance directly to federal funding.
Exactly. It's about ensuring federal dollars aren't used in ways the order defines as, well, problematic or illegal.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think, because understanding this order really hinges on some very specific definitions it provides. These definitions are crucial. Let's start with discriminatory equity ideology. That's a key phrase. How does the executive order actually define that?
Yeah, that's a central one, and it is defined quite specifically. The EO says it's an ideology that, quote, treats individuals as members of preferred or disfavored groups rather than as individuals.
Okay, group identity over individual.
Right, and it minimizes agency, merit, and capability in favor of immoral generalizations. That's the core definition. Then it lists several specific beliefs that fall under this umbrella.
Like what?
Okay, so things like the belief that members of one race, color, sex, or national origin are morally or inherently superior to others. Or the idea that an individual, just because of their race, color, sex, or national origin, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive. whether they know it or not, consciously or unconsciously. It also includes the belief that someone's moral character or their status, like whether they're seen as privileged or an oppressor or oppressed, is primarily determined by those group characteristics: race, color, sex, national origin. Another point is the belief that people from one background cannot or even should not try to treat others without regard to their background.
Sort of like treating everyone the same is impossible or wrong.
That seems to be the implication targeted, yes. It also covers the idea that an individual, because of their background, bears responsibility for things done in the past by others of the same group, that they should feel guilt or anguish or be discriminated against, blamed, or stereotyped for historical actions they weren't involved in.
Right. Collective guilt based on group identity.
Exactly. And then there's the belief that an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment in order to achieve diversity, equity, or inclusion. And importantly, it defines as part of this ideology the idea that virtues like merit, excellence, hard work, fairness, neutrality, objectivity, even racial colorblindness, that these things are themselves racist or sexist.
Wow.
Or that they were created by one group specifically to oppress another group. And finally, it includes the belief that the United States as a whole is fundamentally racist, sexist, or otherwise discriminatory.
That is extremely specific. It lays out exactly the kinds of ideas the order is targeting in classrooms or training.
It's very comprehensive, yes. It leaves little ambiguity about what the order means by that term.
Okay, another key definition, particularly relevant maybe for parents and school staff, is social transition. How does the order define that term, and what specific actions does it say fall under it?
Social transition is defined as, quote, the process of adopting a gender identity or gender marker that differs from a person's sex. And the order lists things this process can include, such as psychological or psychiatric counseling or treatment provided by school staff. Modifying a person's name, it gives the example Jane to James, or changing their pronouns like him to her. Also calling a child non-binary.
Right.
And using facilities like bathrooms or locker rooms designated for the opposite sex, or participating in school sports or other extracurriculars designated for the opposite sex.
So it covers a range of actions within the school environment.
It does, and it makes a point to explicitly state that social transition, as defined here, does not include chemical or surgical mutilation. It draws a clear line there.
Got it. That distinction is important. And finally, there's patriotic education. In a time when history curriculums are often debated, how does the order define this ideal approach?
Patriotic education is described as presenting American history in a way that's, quote, grounded in several things. First, an accurate, honest, unifying, inspiring, and ennobling characterization of America's founding and foundational principles.
Okay, quite a list of adjectives there.
Yes. Second, it needs a clear examination of how the United States has admirably grown closer to its noble principles over time. And third, it includes the concept that commitment to and celebration of America's aspirations and greatness are, quote, beneficial and justified and proper.
So it's not just teaching history, but teaching it with a specific, positive, and unifying frame.
That seems to be the goal outlined in the definition. Yes, it's quite prescriptive about the tone and focus.
Okay, so we have these definitions: discriminatory, equity ideology, social transition, patriotic education. With those in mind, the next big question is the how. How does this executive order actually plan to implement its policy? What's the strategy it mandates for federal agencies? And, how does that trickle down to schools?
It mandates a pretty direct top-down approach. Within 90 days of the order being issued, 3 secretaries, Education, Defense, and Health and Human Services, have to work together. In consultation with the Attorney General, they need to provide the President with something called an Ending Indoctrination strategy.
An ending indoctrination strategy.
Okay.
And what needs to be in that strategy?
It needs to include concrete recommendations and a plan for 2 main things. First, how to eliminate federal funding or support for what the order calls illegal and discriminatory treatment and indoctrination in K-12 schools. And it specifically calls out both gender ideology and discriminatory equity ideology again here.
Right, so cutting off funds.
That's the first part. The second part is a plan for protecting parental rights under FERPA and PPRA, specifically regarding any K-12 policies or actions implicated by this order.
So it's really using that federal funding purse as the main enforcement tool.
It appears to be a primary lever, yes. It forces agencies to really audit where their money is going and how it aligns or doesn't align with the order's directives.
So what kind of details do the agencies need to include in this strategy document? It sounds like a major review.
It is. The strategy has to contain a summary and analysis of all federal funding sources, direct or indirect, that support the instruction, promotion, or advancement of either gender ideology or discriminatory equity ideology. This covers K-12 curriculum, school activities, even teacher training and certification programs.
Wow, that's broad.
Very broad. It also requires each agency to explain its process for preventing or taking back federal funds if they are being used to support these ideologies. And it doesn't stop there. It also demands a description of each agency's process to stop federal funds from supporting the social transition of a minor student, including actions by school staff or teachers, or cases where a minor's social transition is deliberately hidden from their parents.
Okay.
And similarly, processes to prevent or rescind funds if they interfere with the parent's right to information under PPRA or FERPA, or if they violate Title VI or Title IX. Finally, it needs a summary of all the enforcement tools each agency has at its disposal.
So it's a really thorough review of funding streams and agency procedures related to these specific issues. But what about the Attorney General? You mentioned consultation, but does the AG have a more active role beyond advising?
Yes, absolutely. There's a distinct legal enforcement component outlined. The Attorney General is directed to coordinate with state attorneys general and local district attorneys.
Okay, coordinating with state and local levels. For what purpose?
To help them enforce the law and file appropriate legal actions against K-12 teachers and school officials who are found to be violating the law in specific ways mentioned in the order.
Which ways are specified?
The order lists three. First, sexually exploiting minors. Second, unlawfully practicing medicine by offering diagnoses and treatment without the requisite license. And third, otherwise unlawfully facilitating the social transition of a minor student.
So this moves beyond just funding implications and introduces the potential for direct legal action against individuals and schools.
That's right. It signals a potential role for state and local prosecutors in enforcing the aspects of this order related to those specific actions.
Okay, so there's the side focused on stopping what the order calls indoctrination through funding reviews and potential legal action. But then there's this other major thrust, actively promoting patriotic education. And a big part of that seems to be bringing back the 1776 Commission. Can you remind us about that commission and explain its purpose now, especially with America's 250th birthday coming up?
Certainly. The executive order reestablishes the President's Advisory's 1776 Commission. And you're right, it's not entirely new. It was first created by an earlier EO in November 2020, but then it was terminated pretty quickly in January 2021.
So this order is reviving it.
Exactly, bringing it back. And its purpose is stated very clearly to promote patriotic education, using that definition we discussed earlier, and also to advise and support the work of two other bodies, the White House Task Force on Celebrating America's 250th birthday and the U.S. Semiquincentennial Commission. It's all geared towards the big 250th anniversary of American independence on July 4th, 2026.
So it ties this specific educational push directly to the upcoming national celebration.
It does. It suggests a federal effort to, well, shape the historical narrative and understanding leading into and during that major anniversary. The order directs the Secretary of Education to get this commission set up within the Department of Education within 120 days. It's planned to have no more than 20 members appointed by the president for a 2-year term, and these members will be individuals from outside the federal government chosen for their relevant experience.
Okay, a relatively small group appointed housed in the Department of Education. Once it's up and running, what will the 1776 Commission actually do? What are its tasks?
It has several specific functions laid out in the order. First, it's tasked with facilitating the development of a Presidential 1776 Award. This award is meant to recognize students who demonstrate knowledge of the American founding.
Knowledge of the founders, the Declaration, the Constitution.
Exactly. The founders, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitutional Convention, key figures in battles of the Revolutionary War, that sort of thing. Second, it's supposed to coordinate bi-weekly lectures about the 250th anniversary. These lectures should be grounded in those patriotic education principles and are intended to be broadcast nationally throughout the year 2026.
National lectures promoting this specific view of history.
That's the plan outlined. Third, it will advise other executive departments and agencies like the National Park Service, perhaps on how to provide patriotic education at places like national parks, battlefields, monuments, museums, other historical sites.
So influencing historical interpretation beyond the classroom too.
Seems like it. Fourth, It will offer advice and recommendations to that White House Task Force 250 and the Semi-Quincentennial Commission about the actual 250th anniversary celebrations. And finally, its job includes facilitating and promoting private and civic activities across the country to boost public knowledge and support for patriotic education related to the anniversary.
That's quite a mandate. Awards, lectures, advising parks, shaping celebrations. It's a comprehensive strategy.
It is. It shows an intent to infuse this particular vision of patriotic education into various public learning spaces and commemorative events. The Department of Education provides the funding and administrative support. Members serve without pay, just reimbursed for travel. And the commission itself is set to end 2 years from the order's date unless the president extends it.
Okay, so the 1776 Commission is a major piece. But beyond that, are there any other specific actions or directives in the order aimed at boosting patriotic education in schools?
Yes, there are a couple of other points. The order directs all relevant federal agencies to monitor compliance with an existing law. It's Section 111D of Public Law 108-447. This law actually requires any educational institution getting federal funds to hold an educational program on the U.S. Constitution every year on September 17th, Constitution Day.
I wonder how many people knew that was already a requirement.
Right. Well, this order tasks federal agencies with verifying that schools are actually doing this and taking action to enhance compliance. So it's putting a new spotlight on enforcing that existing mandate.
Makes sense. Anything else?
Yes. Additionally, agencies are told to prioritize federal resources where legally possible to promote patriotic education through programs that already exist. It lists several examples. Within the Department of Education, there are the American History and Civics Academies and the American History and Civics Education National Activities Programs. Within the Department of Defense, it mentions the National Defense Education Program and a pilot program on enhanced civics education. And even the State Department gets mentioned, its Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, and specific exchange programs like Fulbright, the U.S. Speaker Program, the International Visitor Leadership Program, also the American Spaces Network globally.
So it's really looking across government agencies to find existing programs and budgets that can be steered towards this goal of promoting patriotic education.
Exactly. It's identifying and directing existing resources across multiple departments towards this specific educational objective. It shows a coordinated push from the top.
Okay, we've covered a lot. The stated purpose, the key definitions, the strategy for ending indoctrination, the push for patriotic education via the 1776 Commission and other means. So let's try to synthesize this. What does this deep dive into Executive Order 14190 really mean for you, whether you're a parent, an educator, or just, a citizen trying to keep up?
Well, this executive order, Ending Radical Indoctrination in K-12 Schooling, it really lays out a very comprehensive federal strategy. It aims to reshape K-12 education in two main ways. First, by defining and actively targeting specific ideologies it labels as radical or discriminatory equity ideology. And second, by simultaneously and actively promoting a very specific vision of what it calls patriotic education.
Right, it's a two-pronged approach.
Right.
Stop certain things, promote others. And it outlines a clear strategy for federal agencies. They need to monitor school practices and potentially withdraw funding from schools that don't comply with the order's definitions and directives, while at the same time reestablishing the 1776 Commission to actively push a particular view of American history and civics, especially leading up to 2026.
Exactly. And it doesn't shy away from enforcement. It explicitly outlines measures to enforce existing parental rights laws like FERPA and PPRA, and it specifies the Attorney General's role in potentially coordinating legal actions against school officials who violate certain provisions, particularly around social transition or the other points listed.
So this deep dive really shows us how federal policy, and executive order in this case, can attempt to directly influence what happens at the K-12 level. Curriculum, teaching methods, even how teachers interact with students and parents, using both the power of the purse federal funding and the threat of legal action as key mechanisms.
Which really brings us to a crucial question to think about moving forward. How might these federal directives actually shape the educational landscape for young people in America over the next few years, particularly when it comes to curriculum choices, what gets taught and how? And also that ongoing conversation, sometimes tension between schools and families. How will schools, districts, maybe even individual teachers navigate these mandates while trying to balance things like local control, professional judgment, and the diverse values within their own communities?
That is definitely something to mull over, how this top-down federal directive plays out on the ground in thousands of diverse school districts across the country.